Hello everyone, welcome back to Fix the Family. My name is Raylan Alamo and we are bringing you truth without compromise for the family. We are back with our lecture series. We're talking about G.C. Dillsaver's book, The 3 Marks of Manhood, an excellent resource for you for the raising up of young men to be priest, prophet, and king of their families. It's a direction for us as fathers, and then as well as the development of our own sons in being the men that are growing into the men that they need to be for our society and for their families. This is volume 3 of our series on this book we're calling Men of Greatness. And we're starting in his chapter 5 on this series called The Scepter of Authority. He starts off chapter 5 with saying, once a man has done violence unto himself by wielding the scepter of self-discipline over his pride, passions, and flesh, and stands firmly in the presence of God, he is ready to wield the scepter of authority and stand humbly in his stead and govern others. So these are the kinds of phrases that are the reality of what a father is supposed to be for his family, which the feminists really get in a tizzy about. It's some of the things that I get in a bit of trouble with. You know, to the point of recently on one of our videos, one lady says, what this man is teaching is not the teaching of the Catholic Church. And went on to challenge that. And asked for, where's my use of the magisterium? So I come back and I quoted the encyclical Casti Connubii by Pope Pius XI, saying, "For if the man is the head, the woman is the heart, and he, as he occupies the chief place in ruling, so she may and ought to claim for herself the chief place in love." So there's 2 distinct roles there, equal in dignity but different roles. But he uses the word ruling. And these words that are used here are meant for emphasis and for example, guidance. And but when we say something like wield the scepter, we are claimed or judged to be promoting brutality, and it's nothing of the sort. But it is an exertion or an expression of strength for protection of the weak, for our wives and children. This is why he wields that scepter of authority within his family. Now in this particular chapter, he goes on to talk about the development of our children, and he's specifically getting toward the development of boys to men and what the ideal environment in the home is going to be to help that happen. And so in order to do that, in order to explain that, he differentiates how a girl grows into being a woman and how a boy grows into becoming a man. So he says, in fatherhood is not something wholly integral to the nature of the creature. It's bestowed from without as opposed to motherhood. So, a father forcefully and sternly commanding his adolescent son to act like a man seems proper. Whereas a mother growling a command for her adolescent daughter, act like a woman, would seem absurd. A woman is most womanly when her acts flow from feelings of love. A man is more reflective and deductive. And that's the problem we have with our education system today, and I'm getting into that a little bit more here later. Just in the back of your mind, women are eventually, after they are into their adulthood, are encouraged and induced to reason the same way men do, without love and in a cold, stern way. But back to the difference between raising girls and raising boys. A girl becomes a woman when the promptings of her biology and heartfelt emotions are gently facilitated or even merely left unopposed. And he used some terminology I often use here that's very, very important and has borne out a lot of good fruit in our own home here with our own family. And this is why I like this book so much, because it so much reflects what we do here in our own home. And that's why I want to take it and just give the examples of things we've done over the years with our children and raising our family, and those things that have borne fruit and that helped us out a lot. But he's got the statistical data behind it to prove it. And it just goes to show you that it works. But he says environment. Womanhood and motherhood are natural gifts that will blossom in an environment that is sweet and cloistered. Manhood and fatherhood, however, will not develop without the issuing of an external call to duty and discipline. So here's the challenge to us as fathers, as Catholic fathers, because we don't have a separate environment for girls and boys. We're all in the same home. But we have to raise our girls and boys different. And do we see how that is not being practiced in our culture today? We're raising, not we, but we see in our culture, people raising all their children to act like little boys. And I'm going to give some examples of that here. So we as fathers, as Catholic fathers, need to have a home life that produces an environment that's good for the development of the boys and the girls. So here's some examples that we've done for the boys. Always good to have some good physical activity for them. Let boys be boys. You know, they have that example they always give about, you can tell the difference by just passing by the sandbox and these toddlers, and you see the difference between the boys and the girls. We have the little boy, and he's making all kind of grunting noises, and with trucks and dozers or horses and lions or whatever, sound effects, animals, and the girls will be just singing a little song or taking care of little babies or just chirping along like little birds. And there's a huge difference there. And we don't need to try to mitigate those differences or blur them or blend them. We need to promote those differences and let them each be their own gender. In our own family, we see an opportunity with things like sports. Some good physical activity, especially when the boys get to be teenagers. Because when they're small, that's when, once they get into school, they will start wanting to put them on medication, Ritalin, and claim things of ADD and ADHD, and that the kids can't keep still, but they're wanting little boys to act like little girls. And so we're tearing down these little boys to try to make them too calm whenever they really need to get out and go and adventure and do things. This is why homeschool is such a good alternative. Not just a viable alternative, but in many cases can be superior to your traditional school setup. Because that school setup that's in place right now is about 2 economic eras old. It's based on an agrarian economy. So there's a lot more that can be done with children and educating them. But as they get older, we'll get them into things like sports, organized sports, and we do distance running. And there's something good to burn off some of these raging hormones that these boys will have at these teenage years. Good physical activity is good for them. And with the difference between the boys and the girls, we like to emphasize the boys do the outside work at the house, the girls do the inside work. Or when it comes to inside work, some of the things the boys could do, things that men traditionally might do, like the mopping of the floors, or just keeping things orderly and clean, whereas we might want to keep them away from the kitchen or limit that to just maybe bussing tables or doing dishes, but not necessarily getting into the cooking so much. Yard work. And over the years, with this outside work, we've gotten into a few different things. Here's some things for you possibly to endeavor to. For men, dads, we are to be the providers of our families. And it's very good to have a second source of income or sideline business. Some of these financial experts call that making money in the margins. And some say that the rich get rich in their spare time, not on their job. And so one of the ways to do that is with real estate. And the good byproduct of that, in addition to it being a financial boon for you, is to have your sons involved in helping do maybe some rehabilitation of a home, or if you want to get into some construction, some things like that, where you can bring them around the job site and get them with Dad, get them around Dad, get them doing something physical. So those are some ideas on activities. Now we have other things as far as discipline and various things there. With the education, as they get older, what we do in the younger years, it doesn't take them all day, especially if you're homeschooling, it doesn't take all day to do the schoolwork for these younger children. But in high school, it gets more rigorous, and we even have kind of as the old school type setup. Some of the older kids, older boys will be in a shirt and tie, kind of like the old Catholic schools used to do. But dress, we emphasize, obviously, very importantly here. With the younger kids, the boys, they might wear shorts up until a certain age, but after they might reach 8, 9 years old, we don't use the shorts anymore. It's always long pants, especially once they get to be teenagers, wear long pants. And it makes a difference. That way, by the time they're men, it becomes the norm. It's already the norm for them, and they're used to it. We don't believe in men wearing shorts. It's just a lack of dignity. Attitude. We want them to show a good attitude, a good positive, can-do attitude, because what we want to do in raising our sons is for them to become leaders. We need good Catholic leaders in our society. Look at these elections we've been having, especially this last one, and how much of a yearning there was for good Catholic leadership amongst politicians. And politics is only one part of it. We're talking about business leaders, leaders within the church. We should be developing vocations within our families, vocations to the priesthood especially. This is part of developing our sons. We should have we should have large families and have some of our sons discerning the priesthood. But they should have a good attitude of a can-do and an attitude if they want to be a leader. And then respect, showing respect for others, respect for their elders, especially respect for parents, but respect for everybody around. Now let's switch over to the girls and some of the kinds of things they do. And this is where I get myself in a bit of trouble. People will challenge me with this at times, and that's okay. But look, it's not required under the pain of sin, but let's just look at the results. If you want to keep on doing what is failing a lot of people and what's causing challenges to marriages and what's causing difficulty, then do it. But we're here to share with you what has actually worked, not only for us, but for all the families we know around us who are practicing the same things. So we don't encourage the girls to be in competitive sports because of a number of reasons. For one, it's bad for their development, but also it develops an attitude within them of competing with boys and being in competition. And this is an indoctrination that keeps on and on and on and goes and follows them. And they learn to compete with men in the workplace and compete with their husbands for leadership in the home, because it's a constant and regular attitude of competition. So we don't encourage them to do that. You know, what we do encourage is kind of like the way it used to be, the cheerleader type mentality, you know, and not necessarily their mode of dress, but maybe like they used to have the pep squad, you know, and cheering on the young men or cheering on the boys in their activities, being there as a support for them. This develops the proper attitude in them and the proper role of being a support to their husband eventually. So we put them in that mode and in that role of being a supporter, which is the predecessor to being a helpmeet in a family. So we start that development in the age, and that's why we say in our home, we're educating for full life, for their whole life. We're not just academics, but what they are going to do in life. And if a woman is going to marry and be a wife and mother, then the academics aren't preparing her to be a good wife and mother. So what do they take part in? Things that are artistic and beautiful, because the female gender, women, reveal God's beauty to the world. They are representative of the beauty of God to the world. Their femininity just proclaims beauty and all kind of artistic things that they can do. You know, we have some participation in music. They take piano lessons. They take voice lessons. The boys also take piano. It's a good thing for them to know and to have. It's a lifetime instrument that they can play, music that they can make, and so it's good for them too. But this is something that the girls will really focus a lot of their attention and time on. Decorating, maybe gardening, and some of those lost arts that are out there of things like sewing or cross-stitch or knitting, these traditional things that women always used to do, you know, making their own clothes, making their own garments. You know, some girls, young ladies, still are doing that today, and it is a wonderful thing. It's a lost art, and it's something we can restore for our daughters, for our children. And then they have various other crafts, handiworks that they get involved with. But for one thing, we never have the TV on as a regular thing. The only thing we ever really use it for is for sports and maybe for an occasional movie. But that's usually reserved for weekends, and day in and day out. There's really not enough time in the day for all the things that we do, and it's not outside the house. We don't run the roads. We're not part of the rat race. We don't run around and do a whole lot of things. There are some things we do have to go out to do, and that's plenty. With having a family of 9 in the house, 7 children, and us, there's plenty of opportunities of having to go out and do things, so we don't need to add to that. But even while we're here, always busy, always doing something. And that's a good tip for you, is to leave that TV off. At some point, I even cut the cable altogether, just so that, because it was a waste of money with the little use we were having of it. So, and once we leave that off, then that opens up the creativity. That TV, for one, most of what's coming across there is poison, immoral, and poor character, and very little virtue. A lot of selfishness that's on display on the television. So it just weakens the character and implants a bitter attitude into our children, into their minds, into their hearts. So leaving it off, helps just with their outlook completely, but it also, when having it on, it just makes such a crutch, and it's so enticing, and it grabs the attention. These Hollywood people, when they say programming, it's a program. They really are programming. They know what they're doing. So back to the book, and we're on page 66 here, about the girls. He says, absence and indoctrination or brutalization. There's a very good, powerful words there. Good word selection by the author. Absence and indoctrination or brutalization to the contrary. A girl is in tune with her biorhythms and desirous of maternity. So how often do we see young ladies, after they are, going to high school and get into college and then get into their career, that they put off having children and then just have very few. And then later on, they look back when they're 40 plus or so and say, what have I done? And there's regret. And I hear these stories over and over and over again. But it is because of the school system and the society, the feminized society we live in, not feminine, feminized, a very deceptive word they use. That is an indoctrination and a brutalization against what is truly womanly, what is truly feminine. And it's ironically, and that's why I get charged with this, ironically, this is even present in Catholic schools. I mean, I hear advertisement for girls, still have some girls-only Catholic schools and places saying, we are developing the leaders of tomorrow. Really? Okay, so, and these young girls are probably, almost all of them going to end up married and in families, and they are developing them to be leaders. It's feminist-based, with the attitude that women equal men, meaning not that they're equal in dignity, but that they are the same, their sameness. And God did not design us this way in role or in practice, in the way we live our lives, especially living out in marriage. So they all want the same opportunities, and they are trained and taught to think and rationalize like men. As he was saying here, a woman would, if left alone, would operate on her feelings and out of love, but feminism encourages them to harden their hearts and to say no to this and to use rationalization like men. So, on toward developing boys into men. In God's grand design of salvation, He employs humanity to help bring about His kingdom. So, in God, in the grand scheme of things, God says, man bring forth. And so, but fatherhood, and strictly speaking, is creatorhood. So let's talk about that. Indeed, He is commissioned to represent and implement the one fatherhood of God, from whom the dignity and authority of the patriarchal office emanates. And there's been, you probably see the video floating around on the internet about the birth dearth and how few children there are and how Europe is mathematically depopulating. Now, I have a very special place in my heart for couples that are unable to conceive, that would love to have children and are unable, or who have very low fertility rate and aren't able to conceive. But I cannot believe that is that prevalent where there's so many small families. And it's always been the Catholic teaching to follow God's order in Scripture, to be fruitful and multiply, be open to children. They would always, you'd always hear that tease and snicker whenever you'd see somebody with more than 3 or 4 children. It's like, oh, those are some good Catholics. Well, good Catholics are the ones who are trying, at least, to avoid mortal sin. And the Pope Paul VI in 1968 did tell us in Humanae Vitae that the use of contraception, the contraceptive pill, does fall in line with those contraceptives that are not permitted by the Catholic Church, and it is a mortal sin that if someone dies in that state will go to hell. It is a mortal sin to use contraception, artificial contraception, including mutilation, or what some people will call sterilization, mutilation of the body so that you don't have any more children. That's what's prevalent, and it's almost commonplace, so much so that in the government, in politics now, we have this thing about having to have taxpayers pay for other people's contraception, whereas it won't pay for their real health care. But on the positive side, men and women, we are made for having children. Whenever we engage in marital intimacy, we're made to bring forth children. So we should be obedient to that and be unselfish and not be so afraid. And one of the worst fears is the fear of poverty. And we have to learn to trust in God and learn to not be so materialistic, and to realize the wonderful thing that having a family is, and how wonderful children are, and just having children around, and how happy it keeps us, and how happy it keeps a home. Because we get so materialistic, we're so worried about, how are they going to pay for their future? Do we not trust that they can eventually learn and do for themselves? And that's what we're here for. We're here to raise them up so that they can eventually be independent, so that they won't always be dependent on us. But if we're so worried about all the things that we want to do that children are going to be an inconvenience, then that's the wrong attitude. And so because of this, I'll see a lot of people in their 40s or so with a lot of regret. They are at 40, 45 years old, and they look back on decisions that they made 10, 15, 20 years earlier. And they wish they'd have done something different. There's one fellow, I was in his office, we were transacting some business, and he asked me, he says, well, you have 7 children, right? I said, yeah. He says, well, how old is your youngest? I said, 5. He says, well, are they all still at home? I said, yeah, they're all still home. And he says, we had our 2, and one's in college, one's in high school, and I never see them. They're all involved in things. And when they were young and they needed so much of our care and attention, I would tell my wife, well, it's going to be great whenever they grow up and they don't need us so much. We'll be able to go out and do this and do that. We'll be able to go to the big city and wine and dine and see all these things. But he says, it's lonely. I'm lonely. They even they're still married and they have each other, but they miss having kids around. There was another guy. It's a very similar story. 2 children, and but he had just had one that had just left to go to college, and he would never come home. And he says, "Man, this is not good." He says, "I really miss him." And not that we have to keep them home forever. Or I'm trying to say that what we're supposed to do is build them up so that they're ready to go. But whenever we have so few on purpose, we miss out on such a big space in our lives of when we could have been having more children and giving. It's a gift. It's a gift of life. It's giving the opportunity for more people to live and to have an opportunity at life, and to bring to help society and bring glory to God. Is why we're all here. Our youngest is 5, and I'm looking at probably potentially another 15 years at 44 years old, still having some children around, and then should be at some point having grandchildren coming before that's over. So, and that's where families used to be and where families could be today. There's the opportunity for you. It's nothing to be afraid of, or that we fear being different. But what's wrong with being different if it's being good? If it's holding a family together and it's having a strong family bond. This is what the church has always taught and held to. Back to the book on page 69, he says, St. Joseph was the last and greatest of the Old Testament patriarchs and the first of the New. Here's another quote from a pope, and this is an apostolic exhortation, so not quite the level of an encyclical, but it's up there for those who are not sure if this is still the teaching of the church. And again, let's be sure we understand when we're talking about faith and morals, and marriage is based in morals, in morality. Faith and morals, the Pope cannot be wrong, and he's infallible, and that it does not change. Just because the times change, faith and morals do not change. This is why the Humanae Vitae held the same teaching that the church always had on artificial contraception. But Pope John Paul II says in Redemptoris Custos about St. Joseph, he accepted with the obedience of faith his human fatherhood over Jesus. And the author elaborates on that a little bit. As head of the Holy Family, he accepted not only the wifely submission and obedience of the highest of God's creatures, the Blessed Virgin Mary, but the earthly submission and obedience of God Almighty Himself. So let's understand, people, this has the fatherhood, the role of fatherhood in the home has nothing to do with superiority of intelligence, or with holiness or spirituality or leadership skills. The father is the head of the home always. Just because he's the father. This is the role of the father in the home. And it's not co-headship, it's not co-leadership. And I'll get that too. People want to try to interpret something that Pope John Paul II said, and he never said it, because I'll ask him, in what document did he say this? Because he's never said it. I'm waiting for somebody to give it to me. It's not there. That we have co-headship, and it's not, we do not have that. A body with two heads is called a monster. But a body with a head and a heart is a very beautiful thing, and a very powerful thing, and a very whole thing. And this is the teaching of the church. So this is what we have on the scepter of authority.